3PNR with Adam R. Welcome to 3PNR. I'm your host, Adam R. And joining me for this episode is Tom Conwell. Tom, how you doing, sir?
Excellent. Thank you for having me, Adam.
I appreciate your time. I'm glad to have you on. Let's start with this. What put you on the path of ufology?
Oh, good question. When I was about 10 years old, my aunt, my mother's sister, was an astronomer. And she had all kinds of astronomy stuff out all the time. And when we went to visit her, boy, I couldn't get enough of it. It got me thinking about astronomy. And of course, I always wanted to know about UFOs. Back then, of course, I'm quite old now, but back then, there wasn't a whole lot of information about UFOs, almost nothing. Now, at least people talk about it, and maybe you get somebody to agree with you. But back then, wow, there was nothing. So I sort of kept that on the back burner and always wanted to know about it. And then, of course, life got in the way. Wife, kids, joined the Navy and worked for Honeywell for 36 years. And then when I retired, I had an opportunity to do something that I never expected to be able to do. I became a paranormal investigator, and then along with that,
you probably there's a lot of parallels with ufology and the paranormal, right?
Oh, you bet there is. You bet. I always thought that there was something there, and the more I started reading about it, the more I realized that not only is there something there, there's a lot there. It's a very interesting subject matter. UFOs are flying all over the place. They're up in the skies. So sometimes you hear stories about them landing, which is not very often, but you figure that they're around, people are seeing them, and they're also, many of them are having paranormal experiences during their sightings, after their sightings, and some people who have been claimed to have taken by occupants of the UFOs have many, many paranormal events happen to them afterward. So there is definitely a link.
It makes me wonder if when you have an encounter with a UFO or an alien, does something in your receptors enhance, right? Because a lot of it is perception. People who pass on, I'm starting to believe, are residual energy is what we're seeing as far as the paranormal go. It's the energy of someone that's passed. And so that being said, it often makes me wonder if people are witnessing things after being or having to deal with directly with UFOs, if something in their brain is like, I don't know, that compartment started to work, right? The software's downloaded.
Boy, it's possible, because it sure seems that way. Your statement is very, very true in most cases. I think that it's just that we're all programmed to believe. Many of us try very hard not to. And when we see something that we can't understand in the sky that is just so over the top, it really does open that possibility, that channel to believe everything else.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Sure.
The majority of people, when you say programmed to believe, that we all have the software, right? We all have the same hardware. We all have the abilities. And what you're saying, this is common with people in trauma incidents. The brain protects you in trauma cases, right? It almost blocks out certain parts of it. A car accident, for example. It's happening fast, so it seems like it's in slow motion. Your brain's trying to comprehend something happening so rapidly. And when you have other traumatic events, people are known to suppress those memories. They're known to put them in some back storage area where they don't have to confront it daily.
Indeed. And some of the people who have been, or at least who have claimed to have been abducted, many times don't realize their events that have occurred until 5, 10, 15 years later.
Right.
Not all, but some. It's too hard to grasp. So I actually believe the mind shuts it down until you've reached the point where perhaps you can grasp it.
Yeah. I mean, there's some people some people have their faith system too. And seeing a UFO or seeing something paranormal might go against the grain of what they believe. And so that's another case of where they're blocking out that memory. Some of it's willed, right? Some people just don't want to recall it or even want to confront it for that matter.
Yes, especially if it involves UFOs, because some of these sightings are just so profound. They're so over the top that you know darn well that you're not seeing an airplane, for instance.
Right.
And your mind says, well, then what is it? And when you realize that you're going to have to go to a place that you're not comfortable going, many times it's shut down, and mostly by older people, such as myself, because we were programmed not to believe that. Right.
Yeah, I know people like this. I'm related to some of them, where in their religious belief, they're if aliens were to touch down tomorrow, they're like, no, that's the devil. That's easily the devil. Yeah. I mean, some people have that going on.
Yep. It's easier to think that than it is to say, well, there's someone who lives in another planet who has totally different belief structures as us. What does that do to our belief structures?
Yeah.
That is, it's too much to confront.
I agree. And that's why I think the government's spoon feeding their, I guess, disclosure. I think they're spoon feeding because not all, like you and I, we're ready. A lot of people are ready to hear this stuff, but a lot of people are not. A lot of religions, I know these people where God made here and that's it. Everything else is horseshit in their mind, right? So
yeah.
It's tough because how many people will have pushback or they'll rebel? I hear a lot of really intelligent people that they're willing to accept the idea that the aliens are us from the future because they still refuse to believe that there could be a different species anywhere but here. So They're willing to accept that other reality.
Mm-hmm. Let me just throw this out. I believe that there are some sightings that people have of things in the sky or direct confrontations that are people from the future.
I don't doubt it.
I'm not overruling that.
I don't doubt it because we know the rules, right? If we're going to go back and spectate, we can't get involved. We could watch, we could observe. It's historical, but we can't change it. The butterfly effect, essentially.
Mm-hmm. I also can't overrule that some of the things that are seen are people who live in a dimension that's right alongside of us. So different, so unique that they can exist and we're not even aware of them.
I can subscribe to that too. I often I say this a lot. We're testing nukes in a desert because it's there's nothing there. It's a wasteland, or there's no life there essentially, right? Humans anyway. So we're testing these weapons in a desert. We're harnessing the power of the sun to see the outcomes in a desert. Now, how do you know in some parallel universe directly next to us, you're not obliterating whole cities? You know what I mean? Like that's the power of the sun. It's going to alter the physics around it. So you're testing it in the desert. You might be killing and genociding countless amounts of beings in a parallel existence.
Sure. The short answer there, is it possible? Yes, it's possible. And that's the thing about this whole UFO question. Everything is on the table. Absolutely everything.
Right.
Most of what we've even thought of to this point hasn't even been considered when you consider the entirety of the UFO question.
Agreed. And, it's not even a question, are UFOs real? We know they're real now. There's no doubt of that. It's what's driving them. That's the big question.
That's right.
And
that's right.
It's going to be tougher for mainstream society to accept one answer. There's going to be a lot of thoughts. I mean, the idea that I talked to this guy, and the idea is that, like what I said, we're blowing up these nukes. And in a parallel existence, it's probably killing a bunch of people, which is why you see a lot of UFOs around our nuclear test sites and our missiles, and they're turning them on and off because maybe they're like, holy shit, they're killing and they don't even know it. We got to monitor these guys. They're out of control.
Yep. And there's the aspect that if they show themselves to us and we are welcomed by them, our warlike ways and our desire to use nuclear weapons on people that look different than us,
right.
That's a real problem
Indeed.
to them.
Well, yeah, I mean, I say this a lot. Let's say that they're another species and they traveled the vastness of space to get here, whether it be dimensional or otherwise. They did that as a species. They didn't have individuality. There was no ideology that was fueling that. That was pure. That's a species that got behind science and decided to explore. And you cannot do that with the separation we have. No way. There's no way we could do it.
Very true.
Yeah, especially
true.
Currency. Look at currency today. Like, currency dictates everything. I often question it, like, what makes the dollar valuable? And then someone says, well, it's based on the gold standard. Well, what makes gold valuable?
Sure.
And so you have a species where they're traveling distances or dimensionally or whatever it is they're doing. There's things there that don't apply. Like, one, your individual race doesn't matter. You're here as a species. Your ideologies of religion don't matter. We're here as a species. And currency, what good is currency when you're traveling the vastness of space? It has no value, right? Because you would just need resources like food, water, and so on.
Sure.
So for you in the beginning, so you get in paranormal, right? You're out there investigating the paranormal. At what point do you get to ufology?
Well, I've always wanted to go that route. The paranormal team that I was with made an announcement that they're going to expand into the study of ufology, and they're going to do that because it was stated by the founder of that team that they feel that there's parallels between ufology and the paranormal. And as soon as I heard that statement, man, my eyes lit up, and I said, me, you want me. I'm the one who can take this and run with it, because I've been thinking about it my entire life. And they gave me an opportunity. The very first thing I did was to write my thoughts on how UFOs could potentially get here. But a lot of people have done that. I tried to take a little different tack. What would we have to do in order for us to get there? And I tried writing about every single little tiny aspect of what we would have to change in order for us to be spacefaring.
Yeah.
And I wrote them in the form of blogs. And I wrote about 38 of them, I guess. Each one of them in the area of 2 to 6 pages long. And that's how I introduced myself to everyone and got an opportunity to talk about ufology. It wasn't until years later that I realized that all of these blogs that I had written and all of that information. Hey, this would be pretty cool. I could put this in a book and not even break a sweat. So I created the book Going Interstellar and put all of my blogs together. I wrote a bunch of little joiners between each of the different subject matters so that the book would read a little smoother. And that actually ended up being my fourth book.
So what? Well, one, if we're gonna go interstellar, it's not going to be a question of propulsion. We'd have to start learning how to defy physics differently. How we have to look at physics altogether differently, because we outside of there being like, the movie Aliens where they cryo freeze you and then they wake you up upon arrival, and who knows how many hundreds of years have passed here on Earth. We would have to figure out ways to cross that vastness in shorter amount of time, so utilizing some form of physics that we don't comprehend yet. Although there's a lot of speculation, right? A lot of scientists are already talking about this. We have particle accelerators to better understand how particles and atoms react, which eventually leads us to a technology where we could utilize travel outside of our planet, hopefully, anyhow. People like Elon Musk are going to have to step it up. All right, Mars is great, but now how do we get further? So that being said, what is your opinion on what's visiting us and why they're visiting us?
Oh boy, that is a really big question. You said who and why. Right. Is that what you asked?
Yeah, well, I could say what, okay. What and why. I mean,
what? Okay, okay. Well, first of all, I believe there's probably more than 20 separate civilizations visiting us from all over. Some may be from a different galaxy, but I sort of doubt that they're from a different galaxy because we're talking about huge distances.
Right.
Excuse me.
Well, that's based on what we know as travel and propulsion. That's limited to what we know, right? We don't know if there's a species out there and they're around, let's say they're around 10,000 years before we came along. Imagine so I always do this, like, what would humanity's technology be in 10,000 years based on what I'm seeing today? Probably be pretty remarkable.
Sure. Look at what happened in the last 150 years.
Yeah. Incredible. I mean, 150 years ago, we didn't have smartphones, cars, helicopters, and et cetera. I mean,
as a matter of fact, we traveled from city to city on horses.
Right. The technology of our cell phone in the last decade has evolved fivefold. I mean, if we evolved like the cell phone, we'd be, forget it. We'd probably already be interplanetary, pretty much.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
But anyhow, continue. Absolutely. Tom, you there?
Pardon me, I'm sorry. What?
No, I'll say you can continue. My apologies.
Okay. Geez, I'm still choking here. What was your question?
Oh, it was your thoughts on who's coming and why they're coming.
Who and why? Right. Okay. I talked about multiple civilizations from mostly the Milky Way, or certainly close by galaxies. I seriously doubt if there's 14 billion light years people have traveled just to come here. That wouldn't make sense to me, because I believe there's trillions of inhabited planets for them to work at and to stop at first before they got here. So, everybody's going to be busy. I think we have a unique planet because of the ecosystem here. And I think that it got everybody's attention early on because of the diversity of life. It's a very unique place. At least I feel that it's a very unique place. And many of the civilizations that are visiting because they're really interested in what they're seeing. They're interested in plant life. They're interested in animals. They're interested in bugs, and they're interested in the higher forms, which I will include human in it. But we're not the only higher form, because I think some of the animals can be considered that.
Right.
So that gets them interested in us. Then, along the way, we lit off several nuclear weapons. And all of a sudden, that nuclear signature, that explosion with a huge EMF spike, got transmitted out, and it got everybody's attention. In other words, to say, what are they doing over there?
Right.
This is I don't expect that signal from that area. Let's go investigate.
Right.
So they come in and look, and they realize that we're generally a warlike planet who's starting to reach for the stars, and they say to themselves, what if they got up here and they found out that little key for them to go and jump to different planets like we can? Are they going to use these weapons on us? But I got them really interested in us. That's the first thing that happened. And then we sort of learned, I should put that in quotes, how to control that. And other things became important to them.
Right.
Number one, our general intelligence. We're learning very quickly, but I'm sure that they're having fun thinking about how we're dumbing down our population, because they don't want everybody to know yet.
Right.
And I also believe that some of the visiting civilizations are a part of that.
Yeah, imagine in your mind, as you're telling me this, here's what I imagine. Imagine humanity. We're studying an animal, and they're pretty intelligent. Like they have a social, like we'll utilize monkeys for example. They have a social structure and a hierarchy, and they're starting to advance. They're learning how to use tools. And one day you're observing this, and you see this enormous explosion. You're like, what the hell was that? And so then we're like, they're using explosives to kill each other, right? It would be concerning to us, even though we're only observing, because, and the rules are when we're observing animals in the wild that we're not to interfere. We're not allowed to do it, which is why I think our observers don't interfere with us directly, because they're not allowed to. That same rule kind of applies, I guess, cosmically. Don't interrupt with something natural. Because imagine in their mind, they see this planet and they're like, look at all these animals down here, and they're all unique, and they're so, like you're saying, the ecosystem's impressive. And then there's that one animal that's really smart. They're building machines. They're actually flying. Let's watch them for a while. And a lot of people used to say to me that, and I say this a lot, they think abduction is absurd. I think it's normal. We as humans abduct all the time. We abduct animals, probably other humans, and experiment on them. And if me and Tom were to go into space and find another planet with inhabitants that were intelligent, like let's say we went to another planet and they're in their Stone Age, right? Or they're in their Bronze Age. They haven't really gotten there yet. We're observing them. We can't breathe their air. You better believe we're going to abduct them, because we're going to want to start a hybrid program.
Sure.
And that would take a very long time. That's not one generation. That's a very long time to make that a successful program.
Yeah.
So I mean,
probably tens of thousands of generations.
Yeah. To be successful anyway.
Yeah. Yep. And I believe that's also going on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it kind of has to. If they're going to observe us and we're a subject matter, they have to make that leap. There's no other way about it. And an example would be, we do this in labs all the time. We take certain rats, we put them in with other rats. They're meant to blend in to see how their behavior would structure itself. We do it a lot. So there's no doubt an advanced life form would absolutely put something in place here on Earth with us that we wouldn't really pay mind to. We wouldn't notice. How would we? We spend so much time on our phones. We're preoccupied with 30-second videos. we probably would not have even realized if they did that. Is that fair? I mean, is that fair to say? You think?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely it is. And it's been rumored by some people who claim to have been taken, and I actually say that in that way because I believe that some people who have claimed to be taken haven't been, and others who haven't claimed yet have been.
Right.
Okay. It's just a whole mix of people there, but some of these people are still within the learning phase of what it is that they're being asked of.
Right. And they're probably having a hard time discerning the difference, whether they had a paranormal, experience or something, otherworldly. I mean, based on everything I've learned and read, it's really, really hard to discern the difference most times, especially when you have a technology that can manipulate the way people think. Right.
Yeah.
So for me, I personally never witnessed anything, right? Zero. Have you ever encountered anything?
Yes. I have seen 3 significant things in the sky. First time I saw it, it was a ball of fire. There were 2 of them, and they were right next to each other, which I thought was a little weird, but there were 2 balls of fire. At first I thought, wow, I've never knew that a meteor could come down where there'd be 2 of them like that. And they were perfectly round. There was nothing trailing off the back. And then they changed course. They angled upward. Well, don't expect a meteor to do that. So I was staring at the sky and I saw that and saw them disappear out behind some clouds. And I couldn't believe what I was seeing. So I kept looking up at the sky, hoping that something else would show itself, and that wasn't the end of it. And then 2 more popped up, following generally the same path.
Where are you at this time?
I was in Troy, New York.
Oh, that's north. That's northern. That's north of the city, right?
Yeah, north of New York City.
Yeah.
We're about 3 hours north of New York City. And then these next 2 followed roughly the same path as the first 2, and then changed its a trajectory in virtually the same point in the sky, and went up behind the same cloud and disappeared. And I'm still trying to understand what it was that I was seeing. Why are there these fireballs in the sky that should be meteors, but there's nothing coming off the back of them like would be if a meteor were burning up? There's no explosion like a bolide would happen. It was just very weird. And then the next second I saw 1 appear, not 2, 1. And it did roughly the same thing. And I started to focus in on where these things were coming from. Because they were all of a sudden big and bright and right there, and I wasn't seeing them come from a distance, which I would have because they were really bright. So I focused my mind on where they were coming from. There was another group of 2 that came by, and then I didn't know it at the time. The last group of 2, I was looking up into a blank sky, and all of a sudden they just popped on as if somebody turned on a light switch. Boop, boop, right next to each other. It took me by surprise. And these things came through and did exactly the same thing in exactly the same way in exactly the same place of the sky, and changed direction and went up and disappeared.
Huh. You know what it makes me think of? So you were in the Navy, right?
Yeah.
All right. So when Navy pilots are running their routines, right? Touch and goes and fly patterns and et cetera, et cetera. I feel like you were observing something that they were doing. Like that's their, like, all right, hey guys, it's test time. Got to make sure we, this is it's a different atmosphere. We got, this new model of whatever it is they're using. We got to test them. And so this is their routine they have to run, right? They have to run that series of tests in that same location, which is probably, I'm not saying that's what it is, but that's what I imagine. That's what I hear. Because if they're performing the same identical maneuver, each individual,
yeah,
it's like touch and goes. They're testing out. They're running some patterns.
That's very interesting. What I was thinking is they were projections.
Huh.
Lights from the ground shining up, making these holograms appear. Or lights from the top shining down. One or the other. That's what they appeared to me because they were so bright. They were so over the top different than anything I have ever seen that I thought that how in the world could they ever be real?
Right.
It was just beyond my comprehension.
What year is this that you're seeing this?
This was about May of 2013.
Okay. All right. Because we definitely had, I don't know about projections that high up. I'd have to look into that. I've never actually considered that before.
Yeah.
Based on what you're telling me, again, what I hear is I hear something running a routine. Because why would they do the exact same thing?
Yeah. Yep. Oh, I know. It still to this day really, really bothers me.
Yeah, I bet you lost a lot of sleep after that, right? I know I would.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm one of these people. It's not good enough. The only thing I think I've ever witnessed ever was a blue-like orb. I live relevantly close to Tampa Airport.
Okay.
And it was storming out one day, and I saw this blue-like orb in the probably. It's hard for me to even say how high up it was. Maybe 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet. But it didn't do anything fantastic. It didn't maneuver. It didn't take off. It just got consumed by the clouds. And so what caught me is the blue orb, the color of it, and the state of it. And it was just perfectly still. And then I had to wonder, could it have been a drone? I didn't. I lost sleep over that. Like, what the hell was that? Was it a drone? It could have been a balloon. I mean, anything I could rationalize because I didn't hear anything. I was walking the dog. I happened to look up and notice it. And that was it for me. I'm not good enough to see something in the distance and not, if I could have flew up to that at that moment, I would have did it.
Yeah, sure.
But I can't.
Sure.
Just like if I get in the field and I go and I see an alleged Bigfoot, I'm going to run at that thing. I'm probably going to get hurt, killed, or whatever. But I got to know. I can't go home that night and like, what the hell did I see? It's not good enough. I got to run at it. Same when I go. Like, I'm going to do a documentary, Tom. Right? I'm going to go out and document stuff.
Okay.
I'm trying to compile as much information as possible before doing it and get locations. But for any people listening, that if I come to your paranormal circle and you're investigating, I'm there. I'm going to run at it, whatever it is. I got to know. So,
I have met quite a few people who have experienced Bigfoot sightings. And believe me, the last thing that they ever thought they would do would be to get closer. They all received a fight or flight.
I'm a weird person, though.
To death, one in the other direction. Every single one of them said the same thing.
Picture this in your head. A 12-year-old and his friends were snuck out of their house in the middle of the night in Florida in the woods to play manhunt, right?
Okay.
So my friends and I are out in the middle of this there was like a park, and then there's some woods and a lake. And I've told this story many times. They all said they saw these shadow figures moving about on the other side of the lake. I didn't see it. So what did I do? I ran through the black of the woods, dark night, ran all the way around to that part, like ran up to that area and didn't see anything. Right. I was really disappointed. It's not till you realize it's not the danger of the shadow things or perhaps Bigfoot. It's the very many snakes, spiders, gators.
Yeah.
The real dangers that you just completely disregard while running for the shadow thing. Right.
Sure, you could trip and fall into the lake, and then there's those alligators. You know.
Yeah. I promise you, if I'm out in the field and I'm documenting and there's a UFO or Bigfoot, I should say, because I can't catch a UFO. I promise you, I'm running at it. I have this problem where I think about what I'm doing after I did it. So that's especially in scenarios like that. I'm gonna run at it. Is it gonna be to my demise? Probably, but I'll document it.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay.
So for the UFOs that you were saying earlier about them, many species, I could fall behind that. I think that the gray aliens, personally, the smaller gray ones, are biological machines that that can be controlled with a consciousness. I think the taller grays are the actual beings themselves, the biological ones. I think that the little grays are being rented out to multiple different, not from here species because they're proven they work, right? As you said, more and more species come to find us and they find us interesting. The grays that are here and established, like, listen, you don't have to actually go down there. And here's our gray models are really good. Here's their background. They've got a lot of research done. You know what I mean? So they could be renting out the smaller gray ones. And that's how they make because that's what humanity would do. That's exactly what we're on another planet, can't breathe the air. Some billionaire wants to come visit the planet. And kind of like that movie Avatar, like, all right, well, you can control one of these little grays, go down there and do your work. Check out whatever you want. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Now, whether the grays, the tall grays, rent out the short ones, I am not so sure of that because these civilizations that visit it's probably not their first time.
Right.
And they all have their own procedures. So I sort of doubt that they would borrow something from the tall grays because I think that they're generally probably pretty close to the vast race.
Huh. Well, I mean, for me, that was just a theory I had. Because I was like, why don't we see the grays? And then whenever they're aboard the ship, I hear, because in the reports you hear them say they always see the small grays first. And some other little blue thing, which I just recently, for the very first time ever, I'm hearing about a little blue thing that's in company with the grays. It's the very first time I've heard that before.
A little blue thing.
Yeah, and then the guy that told me about it referenced a movie I saw as a kid, Communion. I got it. So I had to rewatch that movie, and then sure as shit, there was like a little blue guy there, and I still don't understand what he was. But so a lot of these cases, people say the little gray guy was here. They came in, and the taller grays always seem to be like a projection, which would make sense if their biology would be, at risk of being in our atmosphere. But then when they're aboard a ship is when they start noticing different races, the grays and then the Nordics and then even the reptilians I've been reading about. So that's what always made me think, well, maybe they rent the little gray guys out to do all the drone work, right? And,
right. Adam, that's entirely possible.
Yeah.
It just seemed illogical to me because they have their own procedures,
right,
that they would borrow something from someone else.
Yeah,
because I don't know, it just seemed illogical.
So
who knows?
So imagine the parallels. I think I spoke with Steve Murrah a number of times, and he's right in line with the way you think, and the group of guys you work with. Kudos to them because you shouldn't compartmentalize. I think ufology and the paranormal should be viewed as a whole. Should be investigated as a whole. You can't have it where you have the paranormal guy's not going to talk to the UFO guy because, it's crazy. Like, well, wait a minute. You're supposed to be out there investigating the unknown. And I think that very well falls in line with that. You would think so. That's why I say kudos to you and your group for doing that. That's actually a very advanced move for an investigative group, is to say, look, let's look at all of this. I think it's a great move.
Yeah, it really was. But unfortunately, the group didn't stay together for very long.
Wow.
And I realized that where I really wanted to be was in ufology. And then I've always had an interest in the paranormal and going investigating places, which I still do occasionally. But I have my major interest in UFOs. And still have a tie into the paranormal because there's links there.
Right. Yeah, I agree. What are some of the cases that stand out to you that had the most profound effect on you that you've either investigated or researched?
You talking about UFO or paranormal?
UFOs.
Okay. I didn't get into researching UFO cases very much because I realized that I was going to have to travel great distances and go out in the field and all that other stuff. And that just wasn't possible in my life at that particular point. So what I did was any of the research that I did was based on the UFO databases.
Yeah. So what did you find there? What caught your interest?
Okay. Well, boy, there's a lot of stuff. While I was writing my books, I was trying to document the kind of things that people were seeing and where, and realized that there was too much information that I wasn't including. So I got a great big map and put pins in a map and tried to determine if there were any hotspots just by quantities of sightings. And of course, there would be based on population because there's more people to see things. But what I was really looking for was areas around water, not necessarily in large cities, and lakes and things like that. And that's where I found my first major links. When you get around lakes, especially the Great Lakes, there are just a ton of sightings, just a ton. And so many sightings include statements by people who have seen these things over their head and traveling out to the water and then lowering themselves down into the water. In virtually every single lake, you hear about this. So my first indication, my first inclination was to say, well, there's a base down there. But that became illogical to me. There can't be a base in every lake. That just wouldn't make sense. If these things can fly at 20,000 miles per hour, they wouldn't need to have a base in every lake. They just zip from the East Coast to the West Coast in just a few minutes and be there.
Right.
Or be somewhere else, There's no reason to put a base in every lake. So why are they going into the water? And this is the one that bothered me the most. Why are they so often going into water? And I came up with two possible scenarios. Number one, they are from a water planet and they feel comfortable there. Well, maybe. The other reason that I came up with is that maybe they have to go into the water. And they have to do that because they have issues with their craft overheating. And there's no better way to cool them down than to go into the water.
Yeah, that's true. Especially if you're utilizing like a high frequency or a vibration for travel, there would be a lot of friction. I mean, I could subscribe to that.
Yeah. So that's where I'm standing right now. Those are my two most likely scenarios. And I think the second thing that I said is probably the most likely of all, that the ships need to cool down and they go into the water frequently because they're seen going into all kinds of things, into rivers, into small lakes. But there's not a base at the bottom of a small lake, So why are they doing that? They may indeed be going in there to collect some water for their own use. That's always possible.
Right.
But I think the most likely of all is because their ships require them to cool down.
Yeah, it's definitely not resources they're after because they're going into salt and fresh water the same.
Same.
So it's not, it's not, because the only thing that would make sense is, I guess, to cool down. Yep. Unless there's something below the surface that connects the length of the planet, which I don't know. I didn't put a lot of thought into that, actually, but that makes sense. I mean, especially when you're using a frequency or vibration and your ship is starting to, like, it's developing a friction around it. It's heating the surface of it. Yeah, I could see that, because I often hear about them using lubrications to go through wormholes. The idea of that, right? Or even when you travel, I guess when we get to a point when if hypothetically, if like Star Trek, you want to beam someone up, it's not as simple as just breaking down molecules. You would have to use some sort of lubricant to do that. So I just read a study not long ago or I was watching a show about it anyway, and I read more about it. Lubricants used for any kind of warps. I don't know. It's you know what? It's got my interest. I'm going to look into it now. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I tried theorizing all of the possibilities when I wrote the various blogs, just so I could give people who didn't know much about UFOs and relate to them what has to be done in order for us to get there,
right? Which
would give them the impression of what they must be able to do already and why they would be so advanced.
I mean, so I'm going to have, those books will be in the description of the podcast, by the way, so people can find them.
Yeah.
All right. So let's move into this. We recently had this congressional hearing. I've had some time to digest it. I still don't quite understand why they did it, because it just seemed like more of what they did the first time around. So what are your thoughts on this disclosure, and how's that moving forward?
Disclosure. Whoa. Okay. It's a very big subject. And I think that they are in the process of an actual full-blown disclosure right now in little bits. And they're going to keep feeding us little tiny bits of information. I actually think that the way this is going to come down, and this relates to something that they said back in about 2015, they said that something along the lines of, in 20 years, we are going to discover another civilization on a different planet.
Huh.
They actually said that, right? Out and said it. And they probably thought at that point, oh, it's going to be pretty mundane, because everybody's going to say, sure you will, sure you will. But they said it already. And they said it because this is all part of their disclosure plan. Again, this is just my opinion.
Right.
What they're going to be doing is, in the very near future, say, oh, geez, we have seen something with our telescopes, and something is very promising. And then, hey, we got this radio signal from this general area, and we're looking at it now. And we've been able to decode this radio information. And it looks like it was done by someone intelligent. And then the next step would be, we received another information from them, and we've been able to use the same decoding techniques to discuss where they're from, and to learn something about them. And then the next step would be, well, we sent them information. And then, well, we received a reply from them, each one of them a year or two apart. Well, we received a reply from them, and it looks like they're going to try to come here. And then about 5 years later, well, they may actually show up in the next 5 years or so. That's generally what we think that we're talking to them about. And then, boom, there'll be things in the sky, and that's how they're going to break it to us. Yeah, that's my opinion.
Yeah, because in 2015, Kepler discovered a lot of alien worlds. That's when we started having these breakthroughs, or finding planets like Earth that are out there for us to observe.
Tons.
So much so that something we discovered on that Kepler mission in 2015, we have now dedicated a program to that, to go to that area and send probes. Clearly it's got our attention. And it's funny you say that because I was reading it as you were telling me. I never heard another word about it. And that's pretty common, right? The government's like, well, that's interesting. Let's not tell anyone about it until we know more. So yeah, it makes sense.
Yep. And that's how I think it's going to come down. I may be totally surprised, and 6 months from now there'll be a landing on the White House lawn. I doubt it, but who knows?
I feel like if they're going to land anywhere, it's going to be Disney World.
Yeah. Oh boy, strangeness.
Indeed. So let's tell everyone about your books, the titles, and where they can find them.
Okay, my books are entitled. For the number one book was They Are Here. Volume 1, East Coast UFOs. And what I did was look at the varying network of the different states along the East Coast, and tried to get the sightings that were in the East Coast and try to correlate them to something physical. In other words, why they're here. I looked at things like nuclear plants and Air Force bases and Native Americans and pollution and all of the physical things that I thought might give them pause or give them a curiosity of why they would want to come here. Right. That's the first thing. I did the exact same thing with Volume 2, Central U.S. UFOs. When I did Volume 2, one thing I added was the map, and I went back and backtraced all of the sightings in Volume 1 and put them on the map. So now I have the U.S. map with Central U.S. and Eastern U.S. with all kinds of pins in them. Then I advanced to Volume 3, which is the West Coast, and did the same thing with the pins and looked at all of the various things. Some of the things I came across that were really unique and different related to the Native Americans. In Volume 2, I came across the Seven Fires prophecy, which sort of related what could happen at the end of the world with what's happening now. And there's so many similarities. It's just mind-blowing.
That's the Seven Fires prophecy?
Seven Fires prophecy.
Write that down.
That's something to look up. And I wrote about it in like the last 100 or so pages of Volume 2. And I visited that in multiple times in when I'm on radio programs talking about this particular prophecy. And then those are the first 3 books and the large map that went along with everything. And they are available through Amazon.
Okay. And I'll have links for that in the description, by the way.
Yeah. The 4th book that I did was Going Interstellar, which I sort of described before. It's a collection of my blogs talking about what it would take for us to go there, not so much for them to come here. And then in my most recent book was Earthquakes and UFOs, which is described in the picture there that you
I'm seeing
posted. That particular book, I tried to correlate UFO sightings and various earthquakes for the last 15 years. And what I thought I was going to find is where there was a major earthquake, I thought I was going to see all kinds of UFO sightings. I didn't.
No, yeah.
And I didn't know what to say. I mean, I was totally dumbfounded. I didn't know why. And it took me down this path of trying to find out why this was happening. And I came across a pattern in all of the maps that I made. And this pattern was a continuation of straight line sightings across the U.S. During the time that there were these earthquakes.
Huh.
Well, why would they keep going back over these same areas if they have massive computer systems and they already know what they've been across the areas? They don't need to keep revisiting them. The computers are 10,000 times greater than ours. Why would they have to go back over the same areas? The only thing I could come up with is what's changing. The only thing changing is the people. The people are awakening. And this is happening across the world, not only in the United States, but across the world. People are changing. And that's what I came up with there in the earthquakes and UFOs. And I pretty much have some general proof of that. And that was an interesting book that took me almost 3 years to write it, only because I couldn't come up with why I was getting what I was getting.
Right. Well, it's a good thing, right? You're not putting the book out, just exercising some theory. You're researching it, right? That's a good thing. Let's circle back to the seven fires prophecy. In short, before we close, kind of help catch me up on that. I want to tell me a little bit more about that.
Okay. The seven fires prophecy was a prophecy given to the Native Americans shortly after they emerged from their caves and whatever else back after the last ice age. And this was given to them by the people that reminded them of fish. Then why would fish be talking to them? Well, it just so happens that the people came out of craft that came out of the water. Well, it would make sense that the people that were there seeing this figured, well, they must be fish.
That's true.
Right? I mean, it's only logical.
That's what humans do. We explain things the best we can based on what we know.
That's exactly it.
Right.
And so this they received a lot of information. They were told that in the future, they would travel from that particular point that they were, which was along the ocean up in the Nova Scotia general area. And they would travel from there down the St. Lawrence Seaway, across the top of the Great Lakes, and settle in a place where food grew on the water. Well, where the hell's that? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the food that grew on the water was like a cabbage that were on the Great Lakes at the time, and they grew there, and they traveled to that, and they were able to eat that and sustain themselves until they got settled. And that area was Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota.
Huh.
Well, along the way, not only did they say about all the various travails when they traveled, they were also told that their youth would break away from them. And it would take a great deal of effort for them to get their youth back to the ways of the Native Americans. And that, of course, happened in the 1800s, where the kids broke away and wanted to become their own thing. And they saw wealth, and they saw a whole bunch of other things, and they broke away from the Native American ways. And that extended up until, probably the 1900s somewhat. And when they realized that the ways of the white men at that point were pretty darn violent, and that they were having issues with that. Then they started to travel back to their roots and realized that that's where they really should have been. And the white man at the time created industry, and this industry was poisoning the earth. And that was another thing that they were warned of, and that the technology of the white man was going to poison everyone around them, and that eventually this was going to provide the people there with a choice. And this choice was, you either choose the ways of our world or you choose the ways of the white man's world. And this was going to mean either total destruction and another reset of the earth, or they're going to live in infinite peace. And that's what was described to them 5,000, 10,000 years ago. And they passed these stories on to their youth. And it became the Seven Fires Prophecy. Anybody who listens to this little description, I would highly recommend that you look that up on the internet, Seven Fires Prophecy, and read up on it for yourself, because it is mind-blowing.
It is. It's interesting, especially a prophecy like that where it describes how their land's going to change due to some new settlers long before we got here. That's I mean, it's more than right on. It's crazy. Like industry, everything. That's I'm going to read more about that. I got to look more into that. I've never heard of it before. So,
and just on the full disclosure side, I am not Native American, have no Native American blood, and came across this when I was doing my research in Michigan.
I definitely gotta look into that.
Yeah, please do.
Well, Tom, it's been a pleasure having you on. We had a great conversation. I'm sure we're going to have another one in the future.
I hope so. And then, that was fun.
Yeah. And then for anyone listening, I'm going to have his books in description, so you can find the links to that. And I'm going to say goodnight to everyone that's here. Good day or whatever it is you have. And I'm going to talk to Tom in post.
Excellent.